Hello, my name is Samuel Salzer. Really happy to be here. And me and Laura are going to speak about behavioral science and AI, unlocking better decision making. So, briefly about me, I help leading fintech, health tech, and also sustainability startups to pretty much use behavioral science for good and really get an impact from it. Increasingly, that has involved using a lot of various AI components for the last, I would say, 3-4 years. And it's been interesting to follow the latest, I guess, boom in interest for this topic. So with this presentation, we hope to provide you with two things. So one is I'm going to talk to you about how to maybe a little bit think about AI. So how do we make good decisions about AI? And then Laura will speak about how to make better decisions about humans, partially with AI and behavioral science. So let's get into it. How do we make good decisions about AI? Well, for me, a really important component to all of this is building some form of useful mental model. So when we think about what is in the AI equation, we obviously have both the AI models and then ourselves, and then some potential impact, output, whatever thing we want to do together with the AI. And so let's establish the main players. We'll start with AI, and we've come a long way in a relatively short amount of time, it feels like. So when a lot of people think about AI, I think they didn't really notice much until sometime, let's say last year, when around the release of ChatGPT, that's really when a lot of people got interested. But obviously, there's been a lot of work that's been laying for a long time. And if we compare the latest advances in GPT-4 versus what was kind of the benchmark end of last year, a lot has changed. It's increasingly getting very impressive. And we can even say today that, on most one-off tasks, AI models perform well, as well as a college level, educated person would. And so that is quite wild for many people. However, one thing that I would say is maybe one of the first takeaways from this is that while, of course, these models has been crucial in driving a hype for AI, perhaps equally crucial or more so has been the role of interfaces. So what do I mean by this? Well, again, going back to, let's say, GPT-3, that was the model that was kind of before the current one by OpenAI. That model had been around for about almost 2 years when ChatGPT hit the world stage. And what ChatGPT allowed for is suddenly an interface that effectively allowed anyone to interact with this model. So not much had changed with the model itself, but suddenly there was an interface there. And that is actually a pretty profound insight, because we need some form of middle between a really good AI language model, for example, and a human. The tricky thing is that they're not the same. We have struggling communication, and the interfaces that exist are very much their role. So if you've seen this explosion of AI tools, well, they're all using the same AI model or models, maybe one from Anthropic or from OpenAI, or there's a couple of open source as well. But it's a handful of models that are pretty much powering thousands of AI tools, because the interfaces, the tools are there to kind of provide this connection between the models and the humans. And so with the case of ChatGPT, it offers our opportunity to kind of effectively provide prompts that goes to the language model and then comes back as outputs. And we can, in some ways, think about this as a supporting of overcoming information asymmetry. We know something about our world that the AI model doesn't know. The AI model knows a lot, but it doesn't know anything about our unique context for the most part. And so in many ways, these interfaces' goal is to support us effectively provide context data You can call it context asymmetry. Like, how do we close that gap so that the AI model knows what specific context we're in, what specific thing that we're struggling with, and so on. And so that's a really important insight. And I hope that makes it a little bit more clear in terms of we're not just talking about effective models, but also effective interfacing in providing this context data. And so what about us? What about the role of humans in all of this? Well, if we just do some form of comparison between a human expert versus an AI, at first look like this, looks pretty bleak. In terms of breadth of knowledge, AI wins by far. Very hard to compete with a large language model in terms of breadth. Speed, same thing. Cost, special human experts, much more expensive for the most part. And need to sleep, need to have some form of cap of, let's say, 40 hours a week or so of working time. Not the case for an AI model. So looking at this, you can easily feel like, what's the purpose of humans? We kind of clearly have a huge disadvantage over these models. Maybe we should just plan for early retirement. Well, let's remind us of one important aspect here, though, is that while a lot of these models are reaching human level intelligence in some aspects, it's not human-like intelligence. And that's a really important distinction. So when we look at some things that stacks a little more in the human experts side of the equation of or favoring them, we see that memory is still something that favors humans. Depth is still something that is a very hard thing to reach. Per definition, most language models are trained on kind of the average information that's out there, and that's a little bit also historical data for the most part currently. It's very hard for them to kind of compete on the most, highest level of expertise across various fields. So that's something that is kind of in favor of humans. But also two things that maybe is the biggest things that humans have in their arsenal, which is contextual understanding and breakthrough insights. And what I mean by breakthrough insights is an understanding of what can unlock a breakthrough in a novel context. How do we kind of unlock something that is never been unlocked before? That is really hard to replicate with an AI model. You can try. It's really hard for it to do that. Pretty much impossible for the most part. Same thing with contextual understanding again. We have this unique ability to understand what it means to be a human being. And you can kind of describe this to an AI model, but there's a lot to be asked for that's still not being matched there. So what does this mean? Well, it means that your expertise determines your AI potential. Expertise is becoming increasingly crucial to leverage. And one way to think about this is that we have, let's say, this quadrant. We have domain expertise on one side, we have AI expertise on the other. Kind of dividing this up, we have some people that are novices who are low on both domains. We have some AI enthusiasts, high expertise in AI, low domain expertise, domain experts, who is the converse. And then we have what I currently call expert square, the ones that can leverage both high level of AI expertise plus domain expertise. When we look at value generating or output generating, this becomes really interesting because we see that, in terms of quantity and quality, there's quite a bit of difference here. And we'll walk through each of these at a time. So we'll start with AI enthusiasts. So we can quite easily assume that someone who is leveraging effectively AI models and tools are likely to output more, but can they output better, especially if they lack some form of clear domain expertise? Well, oftentimes not. They often become efficiently bad because they don't know what good looks like. They write poor prompt or ask wrong questions. They're easily fooled by whatever is provided to them in answers from the model, and it ends up that they generate a lot of generic material. However, we can also see that these models, again, they are very powerful. They have a lot of breadth of knowledge and expertise. And in early kind of experiments have been shown to improve writing quality by 20% and achieving that in half the amount of time. So writing 20% better in half the amount of time. That's impressive. That's really impressive. So this means that, okay, you can boost your, call it, quality of output these days, surprisingly a lot, even if you have relatively low domain expertise. But maybe you're not yet at the level of a domain expert in terms of quality generated. What about the expert square, the ones who are kind of both benefiting from the AI and domain expertise? Well, they are the clear winners. So if you look at someone like Andre at Tesla, he says that 80% of his code is now written by Copilot, meaning that he can produce about 4 to 5x amount of code as he coded before. And it's presumably spend more time on the more important or harder, impactful code and be able to outsource a lot of the easier and more time-consuming code. That's a huge difference. And that's kind of what we see here, is that with a combination of expertise and AI, we get more and we get a little bit better. We have a better feedback loop. We ask the right questions because we already know kind of what our current expertise allows us to know. We can easily spot hallucinations, and really importantly, we can spend more time, hopefully, on the really important, impactful problems that can really make a difference, and hopefully outsource some of the more generalizable or easier things that we deal with on a daily basis. And so that's kind of the main takeaway here, is that having expertise is a real boon. It's a real benefit because, if you have domain expertise, that's a great place to start. And kind of wrapping up this part of the presentation, that's kind of what I want to leave you with, in that having that is something you should really take care of. And starting, for anyone, I would oftentimes recommend outsourcing as a skill. It's something that takes time to kind of starting to evaluate which tasks are effectively outsourceable to an AI or a model, or in a systematic approach in an organization, the same thing. But it's worth practicing. It's only going to become more relevant, only going to become more valuable. And so that is definitely something worth doing. Importantly, I generally advise using AI to do things, but not maybe think for you. You can use it to maybe test your thought process and test your assumptions. But really important in that, especially if you use language models in terms of any type of prompt writing for them, really be specific about what is the output you're hoping to get, what is the format for that, and what should the model avoid, for example. So really help the model think, give it context. And that is kind of the last insight, or the last idea around how to make good interactions or good decisions with AI, is that you are really valuable because you have unique understanding of the context. So again, when you provide a prompt, that's your goal, is to provide the unique context that you're within to leverage the skill or the insights from the AI. And so the more context in an effective way you can provide to the model, oftentimes the more you can get back, because then you have kind of solved for that asymmetry problem. So yeah, that is me wrapping up this part. We're in an exciting time. It's still hard to look and see what's going to happen in the future, but it's very unlikely that we'll see AI models that they are today will kind of completely make people with high expertise not valuable. And so hone your expertise and find ways to leverage it is kind of my general recommendation. And for more insights on kind of taking this a step further, I'm now going to leave the mic to Laura, who's going to continue in part 2 of this presentation.
So Sam just told you all about how we can make good decisions about AI. But of course, Sam and I, we are behavioral scientists. So what we are really interested in is how you can make better decisions about humans. And if you ask 10 behavioral scientists what actually is applied behavioral science, you probably get 10 different answers. So just for some background, here is mine. Behavioral science has undergone a little bit of a evolution over the last 10 years or so. And we've moved away a little bit from thinking that behavioral science is all about you getting knowledge on how to influence behaviors, towards actually getting the tools, methods, and approaches to understand behaviors better, and as a result, to making better assumptions about behaviors as part of your decision and design processes. In terms of what behavioral scientists actually do and what I'll be talking to you about today, usually we'll do one or more of those 5 different buckets. The first is that we'll be really interested in defining problems in very concrete behavior terms. In other words, we're interested in who is currently what, why and how that constitutes the problem. So we want to identify all the actors and all their behaviors as part of the system. Next, we want to imagine what the world actually looks like in which we've solved this problem. What are the key behaviors that we'd like to see instead? And then as a next step, we're thinking about what the kind of barriers are that might be in the way of these behaviors. Once we've understood this, we can then transition to a point where we can design solutions based on a good understanding of behaviors and based on good assumptions about behaviors. So these solutions can be products, they can be processes, they can be policy or communications. And then finally, where possible, we'd move to a stage where we monitor and evaluate behaviors very concretely. Now, I said all this, what I'll do today is I want to talk you through some of these boxes to explain how I think AI can actually enhance your ability to and your capabilities to do these tasks. And specifically, I want you to pay attention to what kind of capabilities, in other words, what kind of cognitive processes actually underline some of these tasks here and how we can be really smart about where AI can actually help us with them. When we start, for example, when we start thinking about defining the problem, one key advantage of AI is that it is very strong at divergent, or what some people call lateral thinking. When we're defining the problem, a lot of the times we need to actually really open up the problem space to consider the problem through lots of different perspectives. And that is where AI is really quite strong in giving us a little bit of a head start. For instance, when we want to view the problem through the lens of many different academic fields, as a behavioral scientist, oftentimes we look at one behavior and we think, from a sociological perspective, from a psychological perspective, from an anthropological perspective, what do all these academic fields tell us about how we should ask questions about this behavior to understand it? And here is, for example, an output for a problem such as tax evasion, where lots of different academic fields have something to say about it that can actually help us relate better to the problem. So sociologists, for example, they look at tax evasion in the context of social norms or group behavior and societal structures, and they ask questions like, what kind of societal norms or pressures lead people to evade taxes? In the opposite to anthropological approaches, they'd examine cultural attitudes towards taxation, like the perceived role of the individual versus the community, and they'd ask different questions. So to open up the problem space, AI is really quite useful to get the ball rolling and to do some of this divergent thinking and enhance our existing capabilities there. We also, as part of the problem definition, and this is particularly true for these kind of large societal problems that I'm used to working on, we want to identify the relevant audiences or the relevant actors that are associated with the problem. Take, for example, here we have seen a rise in verbal abuse of girls in school that are linked to school-aged boys in the UK viewing material online by misogynist content creators. AI is really able to list all the different actors that might be associated with the problem. And from my experience, it probably lists 9 or 10 of these I would have come up with myself, and maybe it will miss 1 or 2, but it oftentimes actually also draws my attention to areas that I might have not considered, because right now some of this divergent thinking for me purely depends on my ability to make association and reason through the problem. So I can really enhance my own capabilities by applying AI. And when we're thinking about actors in a system, we're not just thinking about asking AI to enhance our divergent thinking. We actually also wanted to do some of the systems thinking for us. In other words, how are the actors actually related to one another? How are they influencing each other's behaviors, and how are they currently interacting? And I found AI specifically helpful for these kind of big picture tasks, where we want to get a grasp on the problem and actually view how the different actors are related to one another. Here as the example, which I've done with ChatGPT 4 and the Show Me plugin for what this kind of online harassment, the harassment for school-aged girls can look like. Let's say we've now moved on to a position where we feel like we've got a good understanding of the problem in very behavioral terms, whatever the problem you're working on may be. Next, from a behavioral science approach, we actually want to then think about what alternative behaviors do we want to see that we want to enable and be able to drive. And here, sticking to the same example, I have asked ChatGPT to come up with different target behaviors for all these different audiences, and also actually give me a likelihood rating for how able I would be to influence these behaviors through a campaign. Now, key here is to see that this is a bit of a black box. I'm not entirely sure how this was reasoned and how these likelihood ratings were assigned, although on first glance they kind of do make sense. But importantly, I can actually then provide some more information and say, make these likelihood ratings based on these assumptions, or actually reason through why it assumed, made the following assumptions about likelihood ratings attached. So in other words, applying AI at this stage can really help us narrow down what it is that we might be able to do with, say, a campaign or whatever other resources you have at hand to actually impact behaviors. Once we've actually decided on a specific behavior or behaviors or interactions that we want to impact, we can then move on to a stage where we analyze barriers from a behavioral perspective as to why this behavior doesn't already occur and what it is that we need to do to enable it. There are many different frameworks out there to analyze barriers in a systematic scientific way. One that I use a lot is called COM-B, where COM stands for capability, opportunity, motivation, and the B stands for behavior. And this model actually tells us that in order for anyone to engage in a behavior, all of these three things need to be there. So they need to have the capability to do something, so they need to know how to do it and what to do, and they need to have the physical and mental capacity to actually engage in the behavior. The opportunity needs to be there, so everything external to the person needs to be allowing them to do it, be this resources like time, money, but also actually the physical environment and their social environment. And then they also need to have the motivation to engage in the behavior. So they need to want to do it, and the incentive structures around them have to enable them to do it. And as part of this step, in kind of a behavioral science process, we're not just engaging in kind of divergent thinking because we are really, again, opening up lots of different hypotheses as to what kind of barriers there might be going on. But we're also engaging in what I call cognitive empathy, or what is called cognitive empathy. Now, cognitive empathy isn't the same as emotional empathy. Emotional empathy is all about feeling with someone. So you are sad, I'm sad too, which is, of course, something an AI can't do. But I would actually also argue that it's not super helpful to have emotional empathy for solving behavioral problems. They, of course, can motivate us to want to solve it. But what we actually need to have is cognitive empathy. And that is something that most people underappreciate, just how good large language models already are at these kind of tasks. We're thinking about, what does the world look like from someone else's perspective? What are all the influences that might play a role in this person's life? So here's what this can look like for a COM-B analysis, for example, relating to employee turnover. Imagine it has increased and you want to avoid the loss of organizational knowledge and the high costs associated with recruitment, and encourage employees to stay in their roles for at least another 2 years. What you see here are COM-B outputs that are really quite sensible, related to capability barriers, like a perceived lack of career progression, opportunity barriers, like a high number of vacancies in the existing job market, and motivational barriers, such as an increased turnover in middle management, causing instability and loss of confidence in the organization's future. Again, showing actually quite sophisticated ways of giving us more ideas for what actually might currently be going on. Of course, for any behavioral scientist or anyone else, really, the next step would be to test whether or not this is actually the case. And we'd engage in behavioral research, where we develop surveys, topic guides, deploy relevant frameworks, sometimes develop personas. So on the right-hand side here, you can see I've actually AI generated this child, because particularly when it comes to personas of children, we don't want to use real images, and AI is really quite helpful in supporting with that, as well as kind of any of the other tasks that are associated with research, be this experimental design and now data analysis. AI has really, I think, enhanced our ability to engage in behavioral research and speed up at least some of these tasks. And at my final point, we're now moving on to designing solutions. And for designing solutions, really what you want to do is you want to also simulate what the future should look like. So when you're designing solutions, you want to understand, how will people react to what I put out? How will they react with my intervention? And AI is really quite good at giving, some ideas for what you could do, although I don't find it entirely strong there. Where I do find it really strong is in the generation of what I call behavioral risks or unintended behavioral consequences. So if you have an idea and you want to put it out, AI is really quite good at, again, this divergent thinking to try and come up with different ideas for what behavioral risks could look like. In this case, this was a campaign run on encouraging bystanders to intervene when they see street harassment, and it generated lots of really quite valuable and helpful categories of what could go wrong. The bystanders, for example, could experience risk to their personal safety, and giving us then also ideas to help mitigate some of these risks with the communication material that we have. So I hope that this presentation gave you a little bit of a background as to what it is that you could be doing with AI when it comes to thinking like a behavioral scientist and approaching problems in this way. The big question here is actually, what is your own decision-making process? Where are you currently making assumptions about behaviors? What kind of capabilities do you use yourself? How can you enhance them systematically with the kind of capabilities AI is already really quite good at? And then how can you make good decisions about AI and better decisions about humans? We thank you very much for listening to us today. If you want to follow us, here are our email handles if you want to get in touch. But I also want to draw attention to a new initiative that is led by Sam called Behaviour Bytes, which is a community for people exploring the intersection of behavioral science and AI, and I am a very happy board member there. So yeah, do check it out and get in touch with us if you want. Thank you.